when you're entering a new world, like if I suddenly start reading about fintech, which I have no idea about, it may feel a little dense for me. One tweet from Naval Ravikant really helps me there, which is he talks about how you should read what you love before what you read. So it makes a lot of sense for you to read whatever is easy so that you don't make that barrier for entry so difficult for yourself that you'll never see fintech again.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host Pritish Sanyal and you're listening to the 1% Project. Conversations that will help you understand how some of the smartest minds build, scale and operate new ideas and ventures. If you enjoy these conversations, do share and subscribe. My next guest on the 1% Project is Abhinandan Sridhar. Abhinandan is a screenwriter who kicked off his career as an assistant director to Andhadhun writer and national award-winning filmmaker Hemanth M Rao. Abhinandan's writing credits include Netflix's Little Things Season 3 and 4 and Teen Tigada, a film for Prime Video's Unpaused anthology. In this conversation, he talks about how have OTT platforms disrupted the creation process and the new media industry, his experience working with Netflix as a creator, what should new creators do when kicking off their careers, his research technique and what he has learned from Pixar's filmmaking process, how does one judge and manage execution in creative processes such as filmmaking, what are the attributes of a head writer, and how are OTT platforms enabling creators to be producers. If you have any feedback about this conversation, speaker or topic recommendations, you can drop me a line at pritish@1%.live. You can also sign up for the 1% Project newsletter at 1%.live for show notes and key insights from this conversation and every other conversation. Welcome, Abhinandan, to the 1% Project.
Hey, Pritish, so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
My first inquiry or question to you is, has OTT changed the hero's journey?
That's actually a great question. And it's also a little technical because I don't remember every step of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. So I just went back to it and I Googled it and I was seeing all the beats. Essentially, what we're talking about is someone going through a difficult circumstance and growing because of that experience. And I think it more or less stays the same in an OTT space. And by OTT, I mean to think that there's a lot more liberty in telling a more honest story. And perhaps you're also talking about long form storytelling like TV shows, like series and stuff. The fundamental difference between something like a movie and something like an OTT show is a movie would be a novella, which would probably be something like a 100-page or a 200-page novella, like where you get through it really quickly, like The Old Man and the Sea. Something like an OTT show would probably be like a sprawling epic, something like George R. R. Martin, Game of Thrones, where you have thousands of pages condensed into 10 episodes of a season. So in that sense, it is the hero's journey and nothing changes. The same fundamentals of storytelling still stands, but it's a lot more detailed. It's a lot more novelistic. And it's a lot more rich in character. And one major difference I probably think as to why people would watch a series versus watching a movie is that movies more often than not, at least the tentpole ones that you see that sort of capture most of the media attention at least, they tend to be around ideas and premises and conflicts. Whereas if you were to take something like a TV show, it is indispensable that you have an evergreen character, someone who has this ability to sort of grow from conflict and become bigger, and you see various shades to them. So the reason why we watch, say, for instance, Friends is because we're so invested in those 6 friends and how they grow over the period of 10 years. What I'm trying to say is that if you want to like sign up for writing for OTT, then you better have a lot to unspool when it comes to character.
Do you think that the transition for the traditional screenwriter or story writer from the film industry to OTT, is that difficult? Do they need to switch gears? Do they need to switch a mindset?
Switch gears, yeah, absolutely. We used to have a time when film was written in 4 months or 6 months. And now we're talking about a time when 10 episodes have to be written in 4 months or 6 months. And literally your Netflix stock depends on it. When a new season of trailer drops, you end up seeing that the Netflix stock goes up because they know that they're going to get a bunch of subscribers because of that. they're very, 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 so to speak, anal about it. Netflix especially, they're so strict about timelines. If you're starting on November 1st, they want you to put out that final draft by March. If you're getting into writing for the OTT space, you definitely have to gear up for a lot more hard work. And by no means is saying that like movies are not hard work. It's just that it's a lot more novelistic. So you need to do more thinking. You need to have more ideas about the characters, and you need to find ways to portray them. And especially when you have a runtime like 60 minutes, which is such a massive responsibility. Like you get a 60-minute show and you get 10 episodes to do that. You're writing 600 pages. It's humongous, and it's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. That's the biggest difference, because like the Bollywood culture is sort of, ingrained in writers to get away with the 90-page script and put 30 minutes of soundtrack. वो मतलब एक theme अच्छा गाना डाल दिया, उसका एक remix डाल दिया. So it's definitely a culture shift.
You talked about Netflix and their culture. Netflix has been very popular for actually building a amazing and a different corporate culture. And you are somebody who are working with them. So how has that experience been for you, working with them as a creator?
It's honestly terrific, Pritish, because their dogged focus on execution is solid. They've set up processes that work so well. They are a development/marketing juggernaut. They've got the distribution, and honestly, they do it better than everybody else. Yes, some of their titles probably in India still left wanting, and like someone like an Amazon and a Sony Live have done better. But in the long run, I do see Netflix, really holding forth because of the kind of processes that they have and the company culture that they have. They're very clear about what Netflix stands for. It helps sometimes when you're making a particular type of show, and it doesn't help when you're doing a different kind of show. And that's entirely dependent on the specifics. For instance, Netflix does believe in that whole idea of you have to click next episode as soon as that episode ends. Whereas you have other models like HBO Max, where they're like, you know what, we're gonna put out Succession once a week. So watch it, mull over it, take it easy, relax. It's a culture thing. And it's honestly a great time to be a creator, because you have so many platforms that you can go shopping with. You can say, hey, I'm going to do this show which has this ruminative quality to it. So I'll probably go to HBO, or I'll make the show that's really binge worthy. So I'll probably go to Netflix.
Now you have some incredible body of work behind you. You can actually go to different platforms and approach them and talk about your body of work. But if somebody was starting off today, how would you educate that person or guide that person? What should they do if they are absolutely new creators?
That's a great question. There are two things that you need to keep in mind on the creative aspect of it. And I'll also come to the art of the sale, right? Like how to talk to networks, or how to find collaborators who can help you take your story to your network. The first thing starts with the kind of characters that you're enamored by and you have encyclopedic knowledge of. Whether it's an imaginary character you made up, whether it's based on someone that you really love, you need to have absolute, literally encyclopedic knowledge. You need to be able to write their 15-page Wikipedia entry, because that's going to serve you a lot. You do all that writing, and it does not matter whether the network picks it up or not. You do all that writing. I'm sure that you'll become so clear as to why you're doing this and who you're doing it for, that like you'll never ever have questions that you'll not be able to take. The second bit is that characters can't exist in the ether. Like, so it's very important for them to be rooted in a certain society for that. It's crucial that you build a world around them. For instance, if you're writing a business show, it helps so much. If you're a nut for business, if you really love business, you're following business news, you know these little tidbits that Ratan Tata fosters 4 dogs at the ground floor of Tata Tower. You just know these things. And that helps a lot, because these are the sort of details that will really make your world very rich. So especially if you're doing OTT shows, it helps a lot to be obsessed with character and the world.
Tarun Davda, the managing partner at Matrix, he said it in a different way. He said, when you go predisposed about a certain idea and an entrepreneur is able to actually change your view or tell you something which clicks, which makes you feel that I didn't know this, or this is a different perspective, that is when people become interested in you, in your story. Is media entertainment a catalyst for pre-existing environment, or it is actually a creator of new views and thoughts?
Oh, wow. Personal opinion, I think that like it's over dependent on gatekeepers, and there is, if I were to be bullish about Web3, then I'd probably say that some disruption is in order. But I don't know. I honestly am not a soothsayer. I don't know where it's going to go. I do know that it is at the mercy of gatekeepers. And if you see the kind of content that's being made, several pieces of content that you watch feels derivative. It feels like the X of Y, much like what happens in startups, right? It feels like X of Y. It feels like India ka Ted Lasso. Yeah, that Me Too copy culture exists. I don't want to particularly begrudge Indian media industry. All industries suffer from that. Like there is a certain sense of fear when it comes to approaching radically original ideas and uncharted territories. So there is a fair amount of everything is a copy of a copy that tends to happen, which is also very discouraging for creators. But I also believe that if the creators were allowed to just rule the roost without the gatekeepers, then we'd be close to some crazy anarchy. So I guess we need to find the middle ground, and in that sense, it's much like democracy. It's not the perfect system, but as long as it works, let's not tamper with it.
How do you think about your research? How do you go about researching a topic? Because you probably will go from one show to the other, and you may not actually have any understanding of that industry.
My research was a little all over the place, and I would try and create worlds that I knew and that I thought I knew. Then I discovered the Pixar model and the Pixar way of doing movies, and their whole DNA is all about the iterative process. And that's something that they believe in. Even before they zero in on a movie idea, it goes through so many iterations. There are so many meetings, and they have this concept called the brain trust, which is essentially anyone who's ever made a Pixar film. So it started off as 0 people when it was Toy Story, and now they have about 20, 25 people because they made so many movies since then. And the brain trust is an invaluable sort of resource for any creator in Pixar, because they come in and say, hey, I want to make this film. This is why I want to make it. And the brain trust gives them ideas. The beautiful thing about the brain trust is there's a lot of candor and there's trust. There's, of course, domain expertise. So there is no ego there. If someone's saying something doesn't work, they know that they're only saying it to make Pixar better, because literally the next day they're going to be in that meeting and someone else is going to be giving them feedback. So it's, in that sense, it's almost like a utopic, open space where you can like say whatever you want, of course, with like utmost respect. What that does is that even before you've started on the idea, that you had such high quality thinking that you're made on the kind of idea that you're like going to spend the next 6 years on, because it's such a laborious process, like Pixar's animation. That's where the research process comes in. So for example, let's say that like we've zeroed in on something like Finding Nemo. And we say that, yeah, it's about a fish underwater. There's a dad fish and there's a sunfish, and the sunfish is missing, and dad fish needs to go look for sunfish. Now, literally how they start is they basically go on Google and they go underwater photos, and apparently they go 100 pages down in terms of images. They just want to get an idea of what are all the things that exist. And that's a year's worth of work. So they do this for a year after they've zeroed in on the log line, right? And I'm just telling you that if we were to make Pixar movies, we'd probably get to 7 movies and we'd die. Of course, it shows, right? You see a Pixar film and you can see the quality, and it's not 1% better. It's 10x, 20x better than the average film. Coming back to our business example, if I like the world of business, then the first place I'd probably start is I'd probably take the best businessman there is. Let's hypothetically say that's Warren Buffett. And I just go down the rabbit hole of what his philosophy to business is. And if there are like 5 books there, whatever is humanly possible, if I can get the summaries of 4 of those books that in, and if there's a book that I genuinely think that this is absolutely a must read and I can't summarize, then I'll read that book. And a lot of the idea is to just basically start thinking like how a character from within the world will start thinking. And thanks to social media, like I'm a child of the internet, and thanks to YouTube, thanks to social media, you can just go down those rabbit holes, and there is so much to absorb, right? Like, especially with like more accessible things like business or creativity for that matter, or productivity. Oh my God, it's unending, and you get into a frame of mind. I'm reading a book now called Daily Rituals, which basically talks about creatives and their rituals over like morning, noon, and night. Similarly, there's a lot of like Bloomberg articles. There's a lot of articles on Forbes, which basically talk about like CEOs and their daily habits and all that. And you basically just try and consume without trying to make an idea out of it, because those are 2 different tracks. So you realize that Pritish wakes up at 6 o'clock and he does 15 minutes on the treadmill, and then he has a black coffee, and then he does 1 hour of writing. But it's very easy to sort of, and I succumb to this so often, it's very easy to say, hey, I have this idea where Pritish falls off the treadmill and he has to work with a broken shoulder, and that makes him ratty. So he's shouting at everyone. What that does is that like I've I've essentially truncated the research process and moved to the creation process. And it just doesn't make my research whole. So I try to really not switch tracks. Personally, I always try and put a number on how much I need to research, whether it's in terms of days, whether it's in terms of the number of books that I read, or how much pages I can fill in I have this one doc called Big List of Ideas. It's just arbitrary ideas out of nowhere. I'm just like shooting the shit with a Word doc. And when I reach around 15 pages, 20 pages, I'm feeling a little comfortable. I'm like, okay, I know this world, I can represent it. But the tendency to hurry into it is pretty seducing, and got to stay away from that so that you really understand the world before you start commenting on it.
Bill Gates said it, hopefully, that if you absorb enough information, if you consume enough information, you don't need a framework because it will just connect. The reason consultants have frameworks because they don't have the time to actually consume so much of information. So what I'm understanding from you is that keep reading without an opinion, consume that, connect the dots, and then get into the creation process.
One point there is that sometimes when you're entering a new world, like if I suddenly start reading about fintech, which I have no idea about, it may feel a little dense for me. One tweet from Naval Ravikant really helps me there, which is that he talks about how you should read what you love before what you read. So it makes a lot of sense for you to read whatever is easy so that you don't make that barrier for entry so difficult for yourself that you'll never see fintech again. That helps a lot. And I started with tweet, and it's incredible how much wealth of knowledge Twitter holds, especially VC Twitter, startup Twitter. Fantastic. There are some incredible thought leaders there, and like it's all out there for free. I mean, I don't know, someone's going to get really rich off them.
Moving on from research, let's talk about execution. Writing is an opinion. It's a thought. And what is an opinion cannot technically be measured. And you may give it a timeline, but that doesn't mean within that timeline you would be able to produce a masterpiece. How do you manage and judge execution?
That's a fantastic question. That's more a philosophical one. I think the point you're trying to make is about creative stamina and how much can you stretch in these 4 months when you're on a clock and you have to like send those drafts in. And the other aspect is that if you actually were to give it your all in those 4 months and you're burnt out, you're not able to do good work for a long period of time, then like that's counterintuitive. It's always tricky, which is why that's the reason why we have now writers' room. Instead of that one lonely writer in the cafe, now you have 5 lonely writers in the room. You're just sitting in a room and you're talking about your deepest, darkest secrets with total strangers, people you've not met before that room kicked off. And suddenly you're talking about all the daddy issues you have and all this and all that. And someone's like, hey, that's a good idea. We can have a dad-son conflict. And then that weaves its way into the show. But as far as quality is concerned, honestly, Pritish, there's just so many variables that when the writing process is ended, I'm not convinced that you can say we have a winner on our hands, because filmmaking is such a collaborative process. There's just so many steps involved after the writing is done that anything can go wrong. You can have a terrific role that you've written, and you can have one actor who was not feeling it on that day, and that very crucial scene was played wrong. And you see it later finally when it's been shot and edited, and you're like, oh my God, that's not how we imagined it at all. And so what I'm trying to say is that it's so important to have crystal clear communication across all departments. And that's a huge challenge. That is a humongous challenge. I think that happens even in the best sets. And that's something like setting up processes, setting up probably like confidential docs just for the director to read, just for the producer to read. Things like that will really make the filmmaking process more efficient, and better products will come out of it.
You talked about the writer's room, and with little things, you kicked off your head writer's journey. Tell us, what are the attributes of a head writer?
I've gone through a journey thinking about this ever since the writer's room ended. It's essentially the logical reason for doing a writer's room is that 4 heads are better than 1. Work will get done in a faster fashion. There'll obviously be more depth in the story. But at the same time, I have now grown to believe that writing, especially the role of the head writer, the role of the showrunner, the role of, say, a series director, these are not, I don't know, again, this is my opinion. I don't think these are democratic positions. That they're at best benevolent dictatorships, and you need to have you need to have clear communication with the team at hand, saying that, hey, there are going to be disagreements, but ultimately this is one person's vision. The problem with making it a democracy is that the vision may be befuddled. There might be a lot of confusion. There might be a desire to accommodate ideas democratically, which is not how ideas arrive either. So it is a tricky space, and it is new, particularly for India, because we've mostly been writing as one person or teams of two. So it's definitely a new space, and it's definitely a lot to do with what sort of collaboration you have and what sort of philosophy is espoused. Like, do you want to? I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but exactly that. Is this a democracy or is it a benevolent dictatorship? And that's a big question, and I'm tending towards the latter. But I've not been part of a writer's room after LT4. So I'm very curious to know if I'm part of a writer's room in any capacity, whether I'm a head writer or whether I'm just a staff, that I want to know how other rooms function as well. But in terms of the head writer's responsibilities, it's a pretty stressful, pretty lonely role to be a part of. There's a lot that's going through your head. There's a lot that you want to burden your writers with, but you don't want to because you want to make sure that the morale is high. And it feels very corporate-y, but we're also all writers, so we're also fairly the jhola uthao type. We're also fairly left of center in our way of thinking. It's definitely new to a lot of writers in the city, and it's a very precarious job to be doing. And to the ones who do it well, and the shows that you see with like writers' rooms, and especially they've been done well, all the credit to them. It's incredible that they've been able to do that.
Have you ever gone back and asked anybody from your writer's room, how have I been as a head writer?
I have gotten a lot of feedback. I don't have enough of a sample size to judge myself as a head writer, but I feel that I could have done better if this was a show that was mine, that came out of my head. But this was a responsibility that I had to take over because Dhruv decided to sit out of the fourth season, and he didn't want to write it because he wanted to take a break. And it was something that came to me. And to be honest with you, it was very difficult for me to sort of take that post because the idea of the characters, the DNA of the show was secondhand for me. It didn't come as naturally to me as it came to Dhruv. So I was definitely stressed about that very often. I would make house visits to his house at 9 o'clock in the night, and I'd be like, what would Dhruv say in this situation? I don't know. And he'd be like, just do it. He'd just say this. And he'd do it so easily. I'm like, dude, how are you doing that? We literally broke our heads for the past 8 hours and we couldn't come up with that. So that's the advantage of being a head writer of a show that you wrote, that you created. Yeah, it was definitely difficult. And I would suggest that head writer take as much help as possible, especially if it's something that's been a hand-me-down.
One of the biggest enablement, if I may, that OTT has actually given is to get the creator to be the producer.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, because this also brings into the core aspect of business, which is slightly dissociated or maybe completely dissociated from creativity.
Yeah.
So it may be talking about money, business, revenue, ROI, ARR, if that makes any sense in the OTT business, to creative people, and they say, oh, we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
How has OTT enabled this?
It's so nascent, Pritish. We're in the silent film era of OTT now, and the word creator is also tossed around liberally. I don't know if too many see the potential of being a creator. And I don't think that like many of us even know what it entails. I personally don't know all the business requirements that comes with, calling yourself an executive producer. I can say, hey, yeah, it's okay. We don't need a crane shot here. We can do with a steady cam. But I don't know if, for instance, you say that, hey, the budget is 15 crores. How do we make it 10 crores? I don't know. That's something that writers knowing will help a lot. Because if a writer is optimizing for efficiency, then it'll also hopefully salvage the creativity. The product quality will not suffer because of it. But there is definitely a left of center bent, thoda sa communist bent among creative. There is a certain sense of disdain when it comes to looking at the business side of things. People don't want to do it. Again, a lot of this is opinion, may not be fact. It's imperative that like creators be a little less cynical, try to understand the various different aspects, moving parts of the process, because it's going 90% of the way and then, not reaching the finish line. Because as a creator, you have the best bird's eye view of the entire project, and you are giving so much of your life, like 5-10 years of your life. If you're giving to a project, that's 1/7 of your life. You might as well might as well give a shit and like really take it all the way. Creative stamina, probably little less cynicism. This is really the era of the creator. Like creators, anybody who has a lot to say, who has a lot of ideas. There's so much money being pumped into it. There's such a huge dearth of original, passionate storytelling. If creators can pull up their socks, this is their time.
Who is your most admired producer/creator at this point of time?
In Mumbai, it's Anurag Kashyap. And why he's particularly inspiring is because that he's always managed to have a steady stream of work coming out. Despite all the constraints that he's had, he's always chosen extremely difficult topics to make films about. I can't imagine the kind of harrowing experiences he must have gone through to make them work. He's taken a chance on so many novice creators. He's gone to producer meetings with them. He's vouched for them. He's launched their careers. So many people that you see who are like at the forefront of whether it's any aspect of the industry, whether it's acting, whether it's music, whether it's technicians. So many of them owe it to Phantom and Anurag. So it's super inspiring to watch him, and he still has the same zest. You'll still see that he'll at least put out a film a year, sometimes more. That's exactly what I'm talking about when I say creative stamina. It's incredible what he's managed to do. In the West, I admire David Simon, who's created The Wire, who's arguably made the greatest work of art that has ever seen a TV screen. I don't think that it can be topped. It's just such a solid piece of work. The only reason it has happened is because he lived that life for 15 years. You're talking about research, that's research. Like Ed Burns and David Simon. David Simon was the journalist at the Baltimore Sun, and he made a show about Baltimore, and he has seen Baltimore in and out for 15 years. Ed Burns was a cop in Baltimore PD, and then he went on to become a school teacher in Baltimore PD. And with such an encyclopedic knowledge about characters and the world of Baltimore, as we have made the best TV show on earth. You can't aspire for lives like that, because it's difficult for me to say, you know what, Pritish, I need to make the best show on earth, so I'm going to go become a school teacher now and spend 20 years. You see what that demands, right? So it's insanely difficult and it can't be replicated, which is why it makes it such an incredible achievement.
Brilliant. That was a great place to close this conversation. Abhinandan, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You can find the show notes for this episode and every other episode on 1%.live. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it on social media and leave a review. See you next time.